My name is Josh and I play guitar in Vila, and this is Vila Backstage. Thanks for joining us today on Vila Backstage. In the last video, Braden talked about the 10 albums that he couldn't put down, but I couldn't stop at just 10. So here are the 13 albums that I can't put down, a full baker's dozen. First on my list is Carole King's Tapestry. Now this album has I have so many fond memories with this album because when I was in high school, I started amassing a huge record collection by going around to record stores like School Kids Records in Raleigh and the one out in Chapel Hill, Bull City Records in Durham, countless garage sales and thrift stores and just places anywhere I could buy records. Every day that I wasn't working as a teenager, I was in my car trying to get records. And one day I stumbled across this really small record shop that only had a few records in the window, but the guy was like an electrician who was fixing record players and things like that. And anyway, I struck up a conversation with him. He says, not a lot of people your age are collecting vinyl or listening to vinyl. They're all using, at that time, iTunes was starting to be really popular. So he says, come here, let me show you something. So we go down into his storage area. It was in the old house. So he took me down to the basement, and there were bookshelves full of records and just boxes, milk crates full of records, wall to wall. And he says, I'm in my late 70s. I can't move these, and I can't sell them. Nobody wants to buy them. Come back with a clean car and take as many as you want, as often as you want. So I took him up on that offer, and I loaded up my 96 used Jeep Grand Cherokee and loaded it from front to back and took them home, cleaned them all up, and as I would clean them, I would take my record player and put on one of the records that I just cleaned. And one of the first records that I unboxed was Carole King's Tapestry. And so I just listened to side A, side B, and just kept flipping it back and forth while I'm staying up till 2 and 3 in the morning cleaning these records. And it was just a great experience. So I have fond memories whenever I'm flipping through a bunch of vinyl, a crate of vinyl or something. That's kind of what's playing in the back of my head. You Won't Get What You Want by Daughters is one of my all-time favorite albums. So of course it's going to make this list of 10 albums that I cannot put down. It came out a couple of years ago, and I still can't put it down. It's constantly on rotation, and I'm constantly playing it. I had the pleasure of seeing them last year in Chapel Hill, and it was just an overwhelmingly life-changing experience. It was hard for me to narrow down one John Coltrane album to put on this list, but for variety, I just made it one. And A Love Supreme is just one of those albums that, as a unit, as an entire album, it's just, the narrative is so beautifully weaved. Those 4 tracks are amazing. On side B, the ending of Pursuance going into Song is some of the greatest music of all time. Jimmy Garrison's bass solo, I freeze everything I'm doing in that moment to listen to it, no matter what I'm doing. If I have it on in the background while I'm working on something else, when it gets to that point, all of my attention is there, and I've heard this hundreds of times, and it never gets old. If I had to give one album that defined the post-hardcore genre, it would be Repeater by Fugazi. This album has had such a lasting impact on me as a guitarist, as a musician, as a listener, and as a person. It's just a masterpiece, and I can listen to it on repeat, no pun intended. If I had to pick one album to listen to, and only one album to listen to, it may very well be London Calling by The Clash. It's a double LP, a lot to choose from, a lot of breadth, a lot of depth, and it has some of my favorite songs of all time. As a 2-guitar band in Vila, I often think of how Mick and Joe intertwined their guitars and weaved them in such a way that didn't step on one another and created a lot of interesting textures and harmonies and just the way to drive a song forward. As an improviser, it was hard for me to figure out one Sun Ra album to put on this list, but if I had to choose one, it would be When the Sun Comes Out. This album constantly inspires me, and when I'm kind of in a rut and need something to figure out, I go to Sun Ra's entire catalog, but this one always sticks out for me, and for reasons I don't really know, but again, I can listen to it on repeat just over and over again, and when it starts, I can't put it down. Whenever I want to get lost in a sound world, I often find myself in the presence of Tim Hecker, and his album Virgins is by far my favorite of his. The textures and timbres that he uses are something that you can really get lost in, and I find such inspiration listening to it and a lot of my own work outside of Vila that it's just something that is always on my radar, and once I start it, I can't stop it. So it definitely makes this list. Plague Soundscapes by the Locust is one of my favorite all-time albums, and something that I find myself returning to time and time again. Once I start it, I compulsively have to listen to it the entire way through at least once. I'm such a big fan of the Locust that when I was 15 years old, some friends and I cut class and we drove up to Bull City Records in Durham to pick up our copies of Safety's Second Body Last. One of the most hauntingly beautiful albums of all time for me has to be Sunny Day Real Estate's Diary. Jeremy's singing, Dan's guitar playing, the song structures, the harmonies, everything about it sounds as fresh as ever to me, and something that I continuously go back to for inspiration. When making this list and thinking about the 10 albums that I just could not put down, the first album that popped to mind was Wu-Tang Clan's Into the Wu-Tang. Because for every single day, and I kid you not, every day as a teenager, I listened to this album front to back. And to this day, well beyond my teenage years, I still listen to this album at least once a week, if not maybe more than once a week front to back. Anything and everything Omar Rodriguez Lopez touches just turns to gold for me. And I would be remiss if I did not mention At the Drive-In's Relationship of Command. Of course, it's probably one of the most landmark albums in the post-hardcore genre, and something that needs to be mentioned, but I have so many fond memories of listening to this album front to back, and really getting me into, later on, the Mars Volta, and all of the solo projects that Omar Rodriguez Lopez has done throughout the years. I always return to this one when I think about songwriting, and I think about guitar tone, and I think about layering, and just how to get something sounding so raw and sincere, and something that I constantly go back to when listening while we're mixing this album with Vila. I'm a big fan of making something incredibly dissonant sound so melodic and drawing you in to want to hear more. One of the bands that does this the best is City of Caterpillar, and their 2002 self-titled album encapsulates this perfectly. I had the pleasure of seeing them in 2019 with a couple of friends. We drove up 5 hours to Richmond, Virginia to go check them out at a live show. And I ended up picking up a 2016 remaster of their self-titled album on Repeated Records, which I have listened to at least once a week since then. Joe Strummer makes another appearance on this list with his 2001 album Global A Go-Go. For me, this album just really feels like home. The way the instruments blend together is mesmerizing, and of course the songwriting is top-notch. Thanks for watching this episode of Vila Backstage. Be sure to like and subscribe, and in the comments section, let us know the 10 or 13 albums that you can't put down, and we hope to see you soon.